All right, before we get into today's headlines with Chris Smith, there's an issue in state politics out of Queensland that's been growing by the day. And I want to make sure tonight it gets plenty of attention in light of new developments. Now, for much of the past fortnight, the leadership of the Queensland state government has been caught up in allegations of misconduct and allegations that probity is not as it should be when it comes to the declaration of potential conflicts and the use of taxpayer dollars. The latest instalment tonight is that the Premier, Annastacia, is refusing to refer her Chief of Staff to the corruption watchdog for assessment after it was revealed the government invested over $260,000 from a business development fund into a private company owned by her most senior advisor. Of course, critics are saying here that if there's no problem with the way this funding was provided, then the Premier would have no issues at all with the Anti-Corruption Commission looking into it. And of course, that makes sense. At the same time, her Deputy Premier and Treasurer Jackie Trad remains in the spotlight over a property purchase at Woolloongabba, a property that would have likely gone up in value based on an anticipated decision that's sitting on Trad's desk for her to formally make. So it's now the top two officers in the state of Queensland embroiled in separate but equally serious integrity scandals. Joining me from Brisbane tonight to discuss the latest is Queensland LNP Deputy Leader, Tim Mander. Tim, thank you for joining us tonight. Let's start first with the Jackie Trad saga, because that was revealed publicly before the issue with the Chief of Staff. She's left the country. We're not clear where this matter stands. I listened really carefully to what the Premier had to say last week. Now, she's certainly standing by her Treasurer, but she's not giving her a get-out-of-jail card, if I can use that term. She's leaving herself some wriggle room. How far do you think this is going to go?
Well, Peter, good evening. This is a deeply serious issue. The government in Queensland is engulfed in an integrity crisis. And of course, as you've mentioned, it's the Premier and the Deputy Premier that are at the centre of it. So the Deputy Premier's situation just gets murkier and murkier. As you've mentioned, she bought a property in the footprint of the Cross River Rail, which is what she is in control of. She has authority over. This Cross River Rail has a station that's very close to the property that she's bought, so it will appreciate in value. She failed to declare that, a clear conflict of interest, and so that was the first omission. This was so murky that we referred it to the CCC, the Crime and Corruption Commission. Now, we did that on a Friday, and would you believe on the Sunday of that weekend, the Deputy Premier personally rang the Commissioner to discuss the matter. Entirely inappropriate. And then we found out another day or two later that there's another failure of declaring a conflict of interest when her husband's legal firm, of which she is a partner or a beneficiary of, is on the panel of a government-owned energy corporation of which she is the stakeholder minister, again failing to declare this conflict of interest. So it just gets murkier and murkier. She changes her story from day to day as more information comes out, and of course now she's fled overseas on a trade mission. Most people in this state, whether you're in the Labor Party or a commentator, acknowledge that the Deputy Premier is really the person that's in control of this government, and that Annastacia Palaszczuk is a Premier by name only. So this is a real test of leadership of the Premier to work out who actually is in control and who has the authority.
Well, let me just jump in there to something that you disclosed tonight for my viewers, the fact that the Treasurer had made calls to the head of the watchdog organisation, the CCC, which in itself is extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. And it wasn't one phone call. We know out of evidence provided in some hearings that it was multiple phone calls across a different period of time, of course. So people at home can understand the severity of this action. It would be like someone in a court case, either prosecutor or defendant, having a conversation with the judge, the actual individuals before the court. That is extremely unusual, and this would lead more weight to the claim that she knew what she was doing and perhaps was trying to get away with it. Now, she denies all of that. It will be assessed by the ACCC. But your point about the political weight of Jackie Trad here. Is there any chance that the Premier will use this now as a way to see off her nemesis, to take back control of her government, perhaps?
Well, Peter, I'm sure the Premier would like to do that. But the situation is that Jackie Trad is in control of the left faction of the Labor Party in Queensland. The left faction has the numbers both in the caucus and in the cabinet. So we think that even if Annastacia Palaszczuk wanted to move against Jackie Trad, that her hands are tied because she simply would not get the support from the cabinet. So it is a real test of leadership. And, I mean, there's been enough without getting any results from a CCC investigation to prove that Jackie Trad is unfit for office. Her judgment is atrocious. One, to buy a property where there's a potential conflict of interest. Two, not to divulge that information on her register. And thirdly, to ring the CCC chair on the weekend, would you believe, to let him know that she was going to cooperate? I mean, what does that mean? Does that mean that government ministers wouldn't normally cooperate with the CCC?
Yeah, I find it extraordinary. I find it extraordinary. But of course, as I alluded to at the start of the show tonight, of course, this is now also scandal ridden from the Treasurer's office into the Premier's office. Different matter, of course, with the Premier. But we find out her Chief of Staff who has, and I've been a Chief of Staff, suddenly has enough time to invest in a range of different organisations and startups and businesses at the same time as he's taking taxpayer coin to be the Premier's Chief of Staff. He receives a grant, $260,000 of taxpayer funding. He says he stood back from the process to allocate this grant. You can't tell me in a small sort of public service world of estate politics, they don't know that the body seeking the grant is a body connected to the Premier's Chief of Staff. I don't buy that for a minute that they did not know. But we also know too, whilst he's in the middle of working and receiving this grant, he also puts in an extra $100,000 of his own money. So he knows exactly how this is headed. He knows he's going to get the grant. He knows that it's going to improve this company over time. He's keeping a close eye on it to put in another $100,000 that must be lying around. So it tells me he's closely watching this, despite him saying he is not. But worse than that, the Premier says there's nothing to see here. If there's nothing to see here, why is she blocking the referral to the corruption watchdog?
That's a very good point, Peter, and we're calling on two things. So the Premier has decided eventually, after again changing her mind a number of occasions, that she'll get her Director General to do independent inquiry. Now, please, the Director General, somebody that's personally appointed by the Premier, is far from independent. So we're asking that the Auditor General does that audit and make sure that this money was awarded legitimately and is being used properly. But we're also asking for a CCC investigation as well. As you've said, this doesn't pass the pub test. There's a real smell about this. This is the Chief of Staff, the Premier's right-hand person, receiving a grant that was not insignificant, $267,000. It just doesn't pass the test.
Yeah, Tim, and I'm also surprised that you don't have a really robust register of interest for senior staff in Queensland. I'm surprised that staff are allowed to have these external businesses. In the Commonwealth, you're not allowed. If you're employed as a staff member, that's all. You can't do other things on the side. Or if you have any investments, they have to be with the approval of your minister. Do you need a clean-up, not just at the MP ranks, but also in the staff ranks in Queensland?
Well, I think this case proves that we do need that. I mean, when the Premier was questioned during estimates, at first she said she had no knowledge of it and she had to do a further investigation. Half an hour later, because don't forget she had her Chief of Staff sitting next to her, he's passed her a note to say, well, look, I did tell you. And then another half an hour later, she said, oh, hang on, I have seen his register of interest. Look, it does need some sort of shake-up. And again, this is a test of the Premier's leadership and also whether this government can be trusted. And at the moment, there are serious questions over both the Premier and the Deputy Premier's integrity.
All right, well, thank you for your time tonight, Tim Mander. We'll stay across it, as I know you are the LNP in Queensland.
Thanks, Peter.